Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're going to get a lot dirty, actually, as we dig
Yep.
into a gardening technique you might not have heard of, but one that could have a big impact on your garden and the planet. Get ready to explore the world of ramial chipped wood.
It's not just about the plants themselves, right? It's about feeding the entire soil ecosystem.
Yep.
And believe it or not, playing a part in capturing carbon.
Okay, so two things that are very important these days, soil health and carbon capture. But before we go too far, can you tell us what exactly is ramial chipped wood?
Sure. So ramial wood basically refers to the young, thin branches, usually under 7 centimeters in diameter that get pruned from trees. When these branches are chipped, they make this amazing material that can totally transform your garden.
So not just any old wood chips then. What makes ramial chips so special?
It all comes down to what they're made of. Imagine you have like a giant oak tree and a young willow sapling. The oak is mostly tough cellulose, which is hard for microorganisms to break down. But those young willow branches, well, they're full of lignin polyphenols and complex carbon compounds. It's like a feast for the bacteria and fungi that live in your soil.
So we're feeding the soil itself, not just the plants.
Mm.
Interesting.
Exactly. And by feeding the soil, you're creating a more vibrant and resilient ecosystem. Those fungi I mentioned. Well, ramial chips are really good at stimulating fungal growth, and that's crucial for building that rich, dark humus that you find on a healthy forest floor. That good stuff.
Ah, so we're kind of recreating that natural nutrient cycle right in our own backyards.
I like it.
But I'm also curious, you mentioned carbon capture earlier. How do ramial chips play a role in that?
It's funny you should ask that because two students, Kesser and Steen, actually did some research on this very topic.
Wait a minute. Real-life student researchers? That's pretty cool. What were they looking at?
They were working on this project for their Nature and Innovation class, and they got really interested in the potential of using ramial chips in gardens, not just for soil health, but also for their ability to capture carbon.
So they're doing their own little deep dive.
Exactly. They
Yeah.
wanted to understand, why these chips are so beneficial and if they could actually make a difference in, actually sequestering carbon. And what they found was pretty remarkable.
Okay, I'm hooked. What did they find out?
Their research showed that using ramial chips as mulch or even incorporating them into the soil itself can actually significantly increase the amount of carbon that gets stored in the garden. Just
Yeah.
imagine pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and locking it away right there in your backyard.
Wow, that is pretty amazing. So I'm guessing Kesser and Steen were pretty excited about their results.
Oh, absolutely. They were thrilled. And their work really shows how even small actions can contribute to finding solutions to big problems. It reminds us that we don't have to wait for governments or big corporations to act. We can make a difference right now, starting in our own gardens.
So it's about empowering ourselves to take climate action, one wood chip at a time. I love that. So we've talked about what ramial chipped wood is and why it's so beneficial. But now I want to know how to actually use this stuff. Where do we get it? How do we apply it? What are the best practices? Let's dig into all that after a quick word from our sponsors.
Okay, we're back and ready to get into the how-to of ramial chips. But before we get too practical, I'm still curious about all the benefits you were talking about. What else makes ramial chips so good for our gardens?
Well, for one, they act like a natural, slow-release fertilizer. As they decompose, they release nutrients slowly and steadily into the soil, which feeds your plants over time.
So basically built-in plant food. I like that,
Yeah.
I think. But I'm remembering those students you mentioned, Kesser and Steen. Did their research say anything about whether ramial chips are better for some types of gardens than others?
Yeah, they actually found that ramial chips are super versatile. So it doesn't really matter if you have a vegetable garden or flower beds or even fruit trees. They can benefit pretty much any type of garden. No discrimination against certain plant types. That's good to know. But I'm wondering, are there any situations where they're especially helpful?
Definitely. For example, if you've got sandy soil, which is, notoriously dry and doesn't hold nutrients, well, ramial chips can really make a difference.
Because they help hold the moisture and add nutrients.
Exactly. It's like they give that sandy soil a much-needed boost. And speaking of needing a boost, what about depleted soil? That patch in your garden that's been kind of neglected? Ramial chips can help bring it back to life.
Yeah, I definitely have one of those. So how do they do that?
Well, remember those fungi we talked about? They're really important for breaking down organic matter and creating that healthy humus that makes soil so fertile. And ramial chips are like the perfect food for those fungi. They help those fungal networks to thrive and actually rebuild the soil structure.
That's amazing. It's like this whole underground world that we don't even see that's being nourished by these wood chips.
It is, and it's so important to remember that We're not just dumping wood chips on the ground. We're actually working with nature, supporting all those microorganisms that are crucial for healthy plant growth.
So it's a partnership, not just a quick fix.
Yeah.
I like that. But I do have a question about a specific soil type. I have a section of my garden that's mostly clay, and it's seriously tough to work with. Would Ramial chips help there, or would they just make things worse, with drainage and all that?
That's a great question, and with clay soil, you have to be a little more careful. Ramial chips can definitely improve clay soil because they add organic matter and help with aeration, but you don't want to just mix them into the clay.
So no dumping a giant pile of chips on my clay patch.
Got it.
What should I do instead?
The best way to use them with clay soil is as mulch on the surface. So, you'd spread them on top but not mix them in. That way they'll break down slowly and improve the soil structure over time without making the drainage problems worse.
Okay, so it's all about matching the technique to your specific soil. Makes sense. What about for people who are into things like permaculture? Would Ramial chips be a good fit for that kind of garden?
Oh, absolutely. Permaculture is all about working with nature, mimicking natural ecosystems and creating sustainable systems. And Ramial chips fit right in with that philosophy. They help build soil fertility, naturally support those beneficial organisms we've been talking about, and even contribute to carbon sequestration. It's like bringing a little piece of the forest into your backyard.
So they really are multitaskers. Improving soil, reducing the need for fertilizers, helping with carbon capture.
Is there anything they can't do?
Well, one thing they won't do is weed your garden for you.
Darn. But hey, at least they can help suppress those weeds. So I'm sold on the benefits. But now I'm wondering about the logistics. Where do I even get Ramial chips? And once I have them, how do I actually use them? Any tips or tricks to share?
Okay, so let's talk about sourcing. Where can people actually get their hands on these Ramial chips?
Well, I always say, start by making friends with your local arborist. Seriously, though, a lot of arborists are more than happy to give away their chipped branches, especially if they know they're going to be used to, benefit someone's garden. You could also check with tree trimming services or even community gardens. They often have piles of wood chips just sitting around waiting for a good home.
So it's a bit of a treasure hunt. But once we've found our Ramial chip gold, what's the best way to actually apply it? Do we just sprinkle it around like fertilizer?
Not exactly. Think of it more like layering.
Yeah.
So for paths and areas where you want to, really suppress weeds, a nice thick layer is best. Maybe like 5 to 10 centimeters. It creates kind of a barrier that most weeds just can't get through.
So we're smothering those weeds with kindness.
Ooh.
I like it. But what about around my actual plants? I don't want to overdo it.
Right, you want to suffocate them. So around plants, a thinner layer is better, maybe like 2 to 3 centimeters. That'll help keep the soil moist and regulate the temperature. And then as the chips break down, they'll release those nutrients right where the plants need them.
It's like a slow and steady feeding system. I like that. What about replenishing the chips? As they decompose, do we need to keep adding more?
Eventually, yeah. But the nice thing about Ramial chips is that they break down slowly. So you won't have to be constantly adding more. Just kind of keep an eye on things and top it up as needed, maybe once or twice a year.
So pretty low maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Any other tips for people who are just starting out with Ramial chips?
My biggest advice is don't overthink it. Ramial chips are really pretty forgiving. Even if you don't get the layering perfect or miss a spot, your garden will still benefit. It's not an exact science.
That makes me feel better. I'm not always the most precise gardener. What strikes me is how this all ties back to, what we were talking about with Kesser and Steen's research. We're not just talking about pretty flowers or, delicious vegetables. We're talking about actually using nature to help us create a more sustainable world. Starting right in our own backyards.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our gardens are part of something much bigger. They're connected to this whole ecosystem. And even small choices like using Ramial chips can have an impact beyond our own gardens.
It's pretty amazing to think that something as simple as wood chips can be part of the solution, to some of these big environmental challenges. So I want to thank you for coming on the show today and for sharing all this incredible knowledge about Ramial chipwood.
It's been my pleasure. It's so important to learn from nature and to just get out there and experiment, see what works best in your own garden and have fun with it.
And to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to give Ramial chips a try. Discover the magic they can bring to your garden and to the planet. Until next time, happy gardening, everyone.